Yes, hello, folks. Welcome to the weekly Manchester United podcast with my regular co-host here, the excellent James Rhodes from the United Muppetiers. It's Monday, so as promised last week, we would move this podcast up. So we're going to start recording this on Monday. So hopefully that gives you a bit more time to download it through the week. James, how you doing, mate?
Good, 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 good. A little
Interesting
better
week.
than last time, but not much better.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about my contrasted emotions during that Brentford
Yep,
game, and obviously incredible last couple of minutes for
yep,
United to win that game. We'll talk a little bit about that, about Scott McTominay, other problems, Casemiro, Rashford, Garnacho, the celebration police, Sancho apology, death at Cathay. We'll touch a little bit on the protests at the
yep.
ticket office before the game, and a few other things. So let's to get through today. Well, before we get into the game, James, obviously organised protests again at the ticket office in retaliation, of course, for United's really mealy-mouthed excuse for um, the debacle that happened with Galatasaray fans being able to buy tickets in significant parts of United Stadium, which wasn't designated as a away area. Quite clearly, I think the reasonable extrapolation here is that United sold uh, VIP tickets. They sold those where it comes with hospitality tickets, where
Yep.
they significantly marked them up. And this is one of the problems with the aftermarket is United are really half-hearted in stopping that because what they like, and to be fair, it's not just United, is fans creating a market for expensive tickets that they could then later on exploit. So that was quite clearly what happened, and really quite disgraceful. A safety issue, and again, another indication of the fact that United just have no managerial oversight on anything to make sure these things don't happen.
Yeah, agreed. And in terms of the specifics on how and why this doesn't happen, I'm probably not the best person to speak because having most of my experience in American sports, we don't have segmented
Mm,
fan bases in the stadiums. Everybody mixes, right? We don't have the same kind of fan
sure.
culture, so it's a little
Mhm,
it's a little tricky here. I mean, it is funny. I respect quite a lot the way that the English sports and European sports in general set up their ticketing because when I hear about ticket prices being expensive and then being 15 pounds more or something like that, you'll pay $300-400 for an NFL game in the US. It's absurd. The ticketing. That being said, you don't want things to go that direction
mhm.
in football in England. You don't want things to end up Americanized because I think it's actually the worst setup in the US how ticketing works and how expensive it is to go watch games, considering how much money they make here in sports, which is also inflated. The kind of contracts you get here are, I think, even more inflated than anywhere else in the world. So you don't want things to go Americanized on a lot of the sporting aspects when it comes to ticketing and all of that. But yeah, I mean, it all comes down to when you have. I know that you have certain protections in place for the fans for this reason because it can be dangerous. Because there's incidents that have occurred, which I'm aware of, with the fan bases and things like that that have happened over the years. And at the end of the day, regardless of how it happened, the end result is that however things are being set up and run, it ended up in a manner that was potentially very dangerous for the fans. And that's should be the top of the priority is the safety of the fans and the people going to the games and their experiences and not money. But it's sort of just a microcosm of the whole thing, isn't it?
Yeah, look, there's two parts to this. Like the old saying, if it makes dollars and cents, it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And that's been the adage in sport for a long time. You know, another sport that I love very much is boxing. And boxing went to a pay per view model essentially, where they sacrificed the mainstream audience for the fact that they knew there was probably a core element of their support that would pay 79.99 a month to watch two drunk men fight in a bar, right?
Right.
And they said this was more lucrative than free to air TV And once you lose that audience, you don't get it back. Now they're trying to compete with MMA to get that mainstream audience back, but it takes years to build. And this is, of course, why they're going to YouTubers and everything else. And when you swap fans for customers, I can see why, from a business perspective, you would look at it and say, okay, customers aren't protesting, right? Customers, aren't threatening people at the football club. They're coming here, they're spending money on tours, they're spending money in the club shop, and they're they're not the profit we make off a tourist or a customer far outweighs that we make off a local, and they're not as sensitive to ticket prices, everything else. The
Sure.
problem with that is those customers are not fans. So they'll go buy tickets to the team that's winning. And you can do that when you're winning. You can get away with having customers. We see us, we enter Miami. Once Messi goes, they'll be back to trying to get fans back in the ground.
Yeah.
This is a really short-sighted, and a really this is something that rarely pays dividends over the long run. And I've seen this with many teams where once they start losing, their stadium empties out, and they're trying to bring their fans back, the people they priced out. And I think Bayern Munich said this correctly. We could up our ticket prices. Germany has a very, very well calibrated ticket price policy. We could up our ticket prices to something that's analogous to here, or some of the highest price. You do stick in England, and Arsenal have high price tickets and stuff. And maybe it would make us an extra £1 million or euros per game. But that's around an hour in a transfer negotiation. The cost of the fan is significantly more than the benefit to the club.
Yeah.
Plus, one of the greatest selling points is the atmosphere, right?
Yeah.
Do we really want to Borussia Dortmund hollowed out with 70,000 tourists, clapping? I think you really do lose something. Maybe I'll change anyway, but I don't know. I think that when it comes to the Super Bowl, young kids can't afford to go to the biggest game of the year because, some of it, to take a family would cost half a year's salary for some people. I think that is morally reprehensible and indefensible.
It also does have a pretty bad atmosphere historically.
Well,
the Super Bowl, it's one of the worst games to go to as a fan.
It's essentially all corporatized.
Yeah.
It's essentially all, big sponsors, bringing fun, and the wealthy flying on their jets, and I mean, you look at these games and they're panning through the crowd for celebrities. You see the boxing, they're panning through the crowd for celebrities. That's what sells it. And I just think, for me, like, the people that support the game at the grassroots from all the way up should have a price point where they can go to games, where that is still an experience that's available to a child who doesn't have parents that are independently wealthy. I mean, sport rose from the working class communities, right? I mean, football, American football, soccer, lots of sports, they're comprised of kids that have come out from difficult situations, almost always, that end up being superstars. And I still think there has to be a price point. And I do think that it would add something to the occasion that they could monetize, right, in other ways, where there's a core support that should be allowed to attend. I'm not against United having sections of the ground that are significantly overpriced for hospitality VIP. To be fair to United, they've had one ticket price raise in 11 years, so their ticket prices are relatively
Which
decent.
was Premier League wide at the time.
Yeah, but I think what would concern me is, are things that bad where they're willing to take these types of risks? Because here's the thing: there was legitimate reports of kids being assaulted, right? Whether we like it or not, there's a fierce tribal fandom in Europe. Galatasaray fans, Manchester United fans, there's been a lot of history here of this, right? We're in Galatasaray in Istanbul going back to 93. I mean, ask anyone that was there. How intimidating that atmosphere was. Ask Leeds fans. I'm not blaming Galatasaray fans. I'm just saying these things are a reality. You look at what happened in Rome. You look at with Liverpool fans, with United fans. You can go through Lots of examples of this happening. In fact, Eintracht Frankfurt took over Barcelona Stadium last season doing exactly the same thing, and it caused major ramifications. And the next team to play Barcelona after that Eintracht Frankfurt game was Manchester United, and they made sure people with English names. By the way, I'm taking this from the Talk the Devils podcast where Andy Mitten was talking about it. So they made sure United fans with English names did not get tickets to that game. So this is something that doesn't happen by accident.
Yeah, for sure.
So disappointing. But
Yeah.
anyway, I completely support the fans in their protest once again, which is peaceful, well organized, well attended. And I think I support the 1958 Northern Devils 100%. Moving on to United v Brentford. So this had a very familiar feel to it. I want to say a couple of things in defense of Ten Hag. When you're setting up a team and you're conceding a goal when a team has one shot on target, a goal that you expect your goalkeeper to be able to save, a goal that you don't expect your top central midfielder to make a mistake, and then your centre back or left back to make a mistake, and then your goalkeeper to make a mistake. If you don't have the resilience to deal with one single attack, it's very difficult to be successful. And these are goals that you should not expect to concede at this level. Clearly, Onana, Lindelof, and Casemiro are not being coached to do this. Clearly, this is not a result of coaching on the training field. Clearly, this has got nothing to do with any of the instructions that Ten Hag's given them. This is not a consequence of bad coaching. It's not a consequence of bad instructions. It's not a consequence of anything. Maybe you could argue sports psychology or whatever, but when United are conceding that easily and then struggle to score, yeah, I don't know. I think I have some sympathy with him on that first goal.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, this is a complication of trying to measure up a coach or a manager, because most all of them have good ideas, frankly. I mean, when you look at the times you lose, there's times that managers get kind of tactically outclassed, but more often than not, it's stuff like this. It's errors, it's mistakes, it's things like that that are going on, and it's really hard to measure. I mean, in some respects, in some ways, too much blame and too much credit is given to managers and
100% agree.
coaches in sports. When players play well, the manager often gets a lot of the praise, and the same when they play poorly. And the answer is probably not really that. It's probably a lot more to do with the 11 players who are on the pitch than anybody else by far. The manager is a voice, and it's a little bit of a challenging thing. It's also a bit of a changeover in sports. I mean, in the 90s and early 2000s, I think the best managers were all more than tactical managers. They were just managers who knew how to motivate. And that's true of most sports as well. Managers who knew how to motivate, who knew how to get their players up for the games every time, knew how to get the best out of most of them. Now, it's a mixture where obviously there's a lot of tactics that go into these games, a lot of study that goes into these games. But I'll give you something kind of funny on all of this, because we spoke about this. So this is a little bit of a defense of Ten Hag, but I think it's also a bit of something that's a confusing nature of sports in general in terms of what's right. Brighton were getting a lot of praise, for a long time here, De Zerbi. And I shared on here that someone had told me, look, Brighton don't do much training during the week. They don't do much running during the week. United do a whole lot of running and have a whole lot of injuries after Brighton had beat United. Brighton spend all week on tactics. Well, since that game, Brighton have lost numerous games, looked really poor in Europe, and have struggled quite a bit. United haven't really done much better. So you have two opposite ends of the spectrum here of a team that spends all its time on tactics and a team that maybe spends maybe too much time running. I still think is the case. There are issues with United's load management and things like that. But the end result is the same. Both teams are struggling. So what's the right answer? Are both managers bad, or are all the players bad on both teams? Who knows? These are some of the difficulties and intangibles that you get in sports that sometimes you just can't explain. But Overall, yeah, it's not down to, the goal that we conceded is not down to, I mean, I don't think it's down to coaching that specifically. I don't think a lot of them have been down to coaching. I think there's definitely been a lot of times where we set up poorly and the setup leads to goals that occur or leads to exposing players to making individual mistakes that they still shouldn't be making, but that they do. I don't really think that was one of the times. That goal is kind of what it is. The bigger issue I think we continue to struggle with is if you follow the team up to 90 minutes, very few chances, very few strong chances at getting a goal. And one of the things that we've obviously seen is, I mean, I think one of the biggest critiques of Jose and Ole, and now that we're seeing currently with Ten Hag, is that it still feels as though when we have the ball and we're in the attacking areas, that if one player isn't making something happen, we're not
Yeah.
going to score. And that is a little bit of a more of a concerning thing. And obviously I've gotten a lot of mixed feelings about the game, because if you go up to the 88th minute, you're thinking we've been terrible today. And that doesn't change because of those final two goals. That doesn't change because of that, unfortunately. It's good to have the 3 points because you want the win. You want the win. You want to have the points. You don't want the season to be a write-off. But at the same time, can anybody really honestly say when they look back at this game that it was progress?
I'm going to say yes and no. I'm going to say one thing that was different about this game that's been very different to any other game this season is that they found a way to win in the last minute. So if you look at United's other wins, they've been holding on. The Wolves game, the Forest game, the Burnley game, it's been holding on. And one of the things that they'll take from this that they wouldn't have taken had they have gone 2-0 up and conceded a goal in the last 10 minutes and won the game 2-1 is a confidence in their own resilience. The fact that the game is never over. They will take so much more from that than what they would have if they'd have scored 2 goals early on and conceded a random goal in the second half and saw it out. So there's something in that. The international break comes at the wrong time because you lose that momentum, but there's something there in that says we can find a way to win a game. And moments like that are, that you've just done something you haven't been able to do before, what starts to build confidence and trust a little bit in yourself. Now, lots of things were wrong with that game. Once again, when you see the back four people, Johnny Evans starting. Johnny Evans has started in United's last 2 league games, right? And it was a bit of a weird lineup with Lindelof at left back, Dalot right. I would imagine they
would have flipped it.
probably
Maybe,
swap them.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So I think one of the problems with Ten Hag and United is with team play. To cut someone open with team play, you need repetition in the lineup. You need confidence. You need almost a telepathic understanding of the spaces players occupy. And when you're doing that with not just constantly injured players, but players that are new to the club, Amrabat, Mount, they don't really understand each other's game.
Hoyland, of course, as a striker.
Yeah, and you're not building off confidence, and you're under immense pressure. You can't make a mistake. It's very, very difficult to get that rhythm and that cohesion that opens teams up. You look at City. City have lost a couple of key players, right? And they've lost 3 of their last 4, right? So, and they aren't cutting teams open. I mean, they scored against Arsenal yesterday. And for Holland all of a sudden, was on a bit of a drought, and that is really, really difficult to do. There's only a few teams that are really good at that. So when you can't do that, you're going to have to rely on players doing bits of individual magic or making mistakes. If you look at the
Yep.
goals against Galatasaray, they were counter-attacking goals, right?
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
Galatasaray mistaken, they had a punch on the break. Okay, the spaces are there. When they're trying to build out from the back, it's too slow, and
Yep.
the midfield doesn't know how to show. I mean, you'll see it all the time with defenders coming out and they raise their hands like, "Where's my second ball?" And you said something last week that was interesting about trust in players. And I look at Casemiro, and he was exceptional last season. I think we touched on it last week, but we United have a big Casemiro problem, a big
Mhm.
Casemiro
Yep.
problem, in that he is a liability defensively, and I don't think there's a lot of trust in him defensively. So
Yeah.
there's been so many times this season when a runner has, ran right by him and is in his line of sight, and either he doesn't have the fitness to catch him or just doesn't have the will. I'm not sure which one it is. But he's been the cause of a number of goals that have been scored
Yeah.
against United.
Yep.
And you're balancing that out against his goals and saying, okay, fine form. I thought it was really interesting that Ten Hag took him off at halftime.
Yeah.
I thought it was ballsy of Ten Hag.
It's unusual. Yeah.
Also, I thought it was interesting what he said. Why was he wanted to play more football? The other thing that kind of got missed against Galatasaray that I meant to bring up was when Christian Eriksen was asked why United concede goals immediately after scoring. And he said, was it confidence? And he goes, no, it's a concentration focus issue, right? It's mental sharpness. That's really concerning, right? Because that's
Yeah.
something that you expect an athlete to bring. There's not much Ten Hag can do to bring it. You know, you either switched on or you're not. That's something. There's an old cliche in football: you're never more vulnerable than when you score. For this reason, but these are things that professional teams should be able to correct really quickly.
Yep.
So I think some of the problems that exist at United are not easily fixable, and having a Casemiro problem in October
Yeah.
uh, is a big concern. How do you fix that?
I don't know. I honestly don't know because unfortunately, this is where we keep ending up at United. We have a few issues. One of them is that, um, you know, this is where this kind of slight debate comes into play. That we'll make it a little bit about Ten Hag, but more about the club because this was where it comes back to. There was a good article from the Athletic where Laurie acknowledged a couple of things in there that we've been kind of discussing. It's one of my major issues with the club management and recruitment for a long time because it leads to these problems. And in it, he talks about this was after the loss, I think, to Galatasaray. And, there's a lot of articles that started coming out about the pressure on Eric Ten Hag's job.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe that it was almost like maybe not pressure on Eric Ten Hag's job, but it's like those pre-pressure on Eric Ten
Right.
Hag's job, which is kind
Yeah,
of funny,
the
right? It's like
conversation's starting to
he's
be
not under pressure on his job
mm-hmm.
yet, which is basically saying he's under pressure under his job,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't want to say it yet, right? That comes out all over the place, which is very funny. Um,
Yeah.
and it acknowledges that there's quite a few signings. That one of the biggest problems he has is a lot of the signings that he made were players who are not at the top of United's list, that were pushed to the top of United's list by the manager. And those are the players who are unfortunately underperforming. Onana, for example. I know for certain Diogo Costa at Porto is one of the most scouted players in United's probably history. They watched every game from him for almost 2 years. And, he was 100% seen, that's the guy. He's going to be probably the best keeper in the world someday, and another Allison type of player. They didn't get him because Erik ten Hag liked Onana, and let's not forget, Onana is cheaper by about 15 million, which is obviously a factor. There's examples of these things, and the thing is, what I don't like is because this is the part where the conversation gets complicated. And for a long time, people who've been following me have noticed last year, this year, I say it a lot. I say you have to protect managers from themselves in some of these areas because otherwise they'll really tie their own noose in a lot of ways. And you have to keep them from it. Jurgen Klopp wanted Julian Brandt at Liverpool before he got Mo Salah. And now the name of the guy, Edwards was the director at the time, told him, no, listen, not the right guy for you. I'll get you someone better. And he got him Mo Salah, which obviously has turned out to be one of the best signings in Premier League history, one of the best players in Premier League history at this point in time as a forward. And that's what you have the whole department supposed to do. That's what your directors are supposed to do. That's what your recruitment team is supposed to do. They're supposed to step in and say, this is who we need. This is who we want. These are the players that we should be going for. And we can talk about Casemiro. Let's look at the reality of this situation. Why did we sign Casemiro in the first place? We spent the summer chasing Frankie de Jong in a very, very, what was probably a disastrous in a lot of ways, short and long term, the consequences that has had on the club. Because the chasing of Frankie de Jong tied up something in a range of 75 million pounds of our transfer budget at the time, and around 300 to 400,000 a week in wages that were being offered. Declan Rice was attainable, a player who now has obviously moved to Arsenal, and we wouldn't be having this discussion if it was Declan Rice who had been brought in instead of Casemiro. Paying big wages and big money for a player who is moving towards the latter stages of their career is the antithesis of the project that was being sold by bringing Erik ten Hag in. And now he's dealing with that problem. So it's not his fault, but it is a huge problem for the club now. And it is a huge problem for him. And I know, sorry, last thing on that one, that I know they know this too, because they spent the summer looking at names that a lot of them have not been brought up or mentioned. They spent the summer looking at, as I mentioned, a player, Ezekiel Palacios from Leverkusen, and seeing if they could bring him in, and at latest bring him in by next summer, because they expect Casemiro likely to leave for Saudi at some point in the next year or two, and it may be sooner rather than later on that note. But I know that they know the writing's on the wall, but that's an issue. If you sign Casemiro in summer 2022 and in summer 2023 you're looking for his replacement, it's it's just business as usual at United, isn't it?
Well, so I'm going to say a couple of things. First of all, United's recruitment pre-Ten Hag was appalling, absolutely embarrassing, a total disgrace, in all honesty, and a big part of the reason why they're in this mess. I mean, they're sitting with a £72 million winger right now that was signed. And the more I hear about Jadon Sancho, I still can't understand why he was signed, because I'm going, he's left-hand sided player. All he wanted to play on the left. That's just revealed in the Solskjaer interview. And I'm like, well, how did you think you were going to fit him and Rashford in the same team? Right. I don't understand. Like, at what point does somebody stand up and say, well, hang on a minute, you've got one of the club's best players on the left-hand side. And why wasn't Jadon Sancho asking these questions, before he signed for United? Like, where am I going to play? These things are so obvious to me that I don't understand why he was signed if that was the position that he really wanted to play. And that's admission from the manager. And I almost felt that when Solskjaer was saying that, it was sort of an indirect way of saying, I wasn't the one that pursued him, right? I don't know. I don't think he completely washed his hands of that. But Jadon Sancho was sent to play in a position that United already had, a very good player in. Anyway.
I can tell you, just to be clear on this, because we've spoken a lot about that summer 2020, not when Jadon Sancho was signed, because he was signed the following summer, but the initial attempt. And I know for a fact that the head scout, who's no longer here, chief scout, Marcel Bout, who's no longer here, during that summer told them, when they were looking at offering like 100 million for Jadon Sancho, said, why don't we drop this and buy Harry Kane? Specifically, that was his position. Why don't we drop this and buy Harry Kane? Why are we going for this right now? It's a mess.
Well, so okay, perfect example. We'll get to that in a second. So, the squad's unbalanced. I, I look at the players that Ten Hag signed because I just recruitment before and after. So he comes into a football club that, as Ralph Rangnick said, you have players here that aren't fit to play any system. There's no, there's no similarity. There's no balance.
Yeah.
There's some for this
Yep.
system, some for that system. The first thing you have to do is identify the system that you want to play, then buy players that are suited to play
Yep.
that system.
Yep.
And that's what Klopp did, and that's what everybody else did.
Yep.
So he comes in, he says, I want Frankie de Jong. Now, again, I know for a fact that when he was in his interview with United, they asked him these questions. What players do you want? What players can we get? And he told them De Jong and named a number of other players. So United had months to work on that. They said they're going to start working on it in June.
Yeah.
And as we know, the bottleneck here is Joe Glazer. Right? Every single thing has to get approved from Joe Glazer. So everything moves at a snail's pace. So Ten Hag's probably coming in expecting a level of efficiency and expediency, right, with these types of deals. And of course, he gets dragged out. United should have been the one that turned around and put a deadline on this, going, we don't have something done by December or by July
1st. Yeah.
Because that also forces Barcelona's hand into doing something, right? And it also forces Frankie de Jong's hand. Okay, well, look, if this move's going to happen, two things need to happen. Barcelona need to be okay with selling him, and Frankie de Jong needs to really want the move. We're going to find out either by July 1st. We're going to turn around and say, if we don't have a commitment from either Barcelona or Frankie de Jong by July 1st, we move on. It puts them under pressure to make a decision. You move on. They went for Casemiro after they lost to Brentford, right? And they broke their own policy of not giving these contracts out to 30-year-olds. Real Madrid had already planned for his departure by signing Tchouaméni and Camavinga, right? Two exceptional young players, right? Which United should have been after one of them.
I have been working on Jude Bellingham
right?
already as
Again,
well.
I know they want the Camavinga and all that, and they were interested in Tchouaméni. But now they get the player. And I don't mean a stereotype here, but Brazilian players typically don't age well.
Yeah.
Okay. Happens a lot. So a lot of them are exceptional in their 20s and their 30s. There's a drop off. He was exceptional in his first season, no doubt. Up until almost the League Cup final, was one of United's best players, right? Was very rarely have I seen a player come in and make such a difference that quickly. I have no doubt in my mind, had he not have been there, United would not have qualified.
Oh, yeah.
Which I was like, you go back to the last couple of games of the season, he was scoring in key games. He scored in that Bournemouth game, that 1-0 one. We needed to win. He stepped up. He was a captain. He was a leader. Not a captain, but a leader. Scored in that Chelsea game at Old Trafford, right? There was, when United needed him, he stepped up, right? So I would say if you rate him over the course of his tenure at United, you would have to say he's been a success. Been poor the last number of games, I accept that. I would say that Sandro Martinez has been one of the best signings United have made since Ferguson left. Right?
I would agree with that.
The problem at centre back, became a crowd favourite right away, left-footed centre back, and there's a massive contrast between when he plays and when he doesn't play. I would say Terrell Malacia, United didn't pay a lot, paid 12 million.
It's a low risk signing.
Yeah, I would say, certainly not a negative. I would say Rasmus Højlund and Casemiro are two players that haven't played for him before. Maybe United can take some credit for, I don't know. But Rasmus Højlund,
they can take credit for Højlund.
It's very encouraging, right?
Yeah.
Anthony is a problem. Anthony is definitely not justifiable. Onana, definitely not justifiable at this point. But
hopefully it'll improve. I would give him time too. I know he's better than this, but
he's obviously
it's pretty bad.
This is a guy that was in the Champions League final where he kept going. Wow, something like 7 clean sheets in the Champions League last season. He's obviously better than this, right? Right now doesn't look good. Amrabat, we got to make up our mind. The rest you can't really judge them on because they're all loans, but big horse, Sabitzer, they're big points. But I'll have to say, for the most part, his recruitment has been better than what went before. I mean, United have made so many mistakes in the market, right? So I would say, for the most part, it's been better than what we've seen. Now, he should have had Harry Kane. right? Well,
Yep.
United decided there was a better use of resources, and not pursuing arguably the best striker in the world. So
Joe
United
Glazer
won.
decided a better use of resources.
Yeah, so United
Yeah.
won, and I've said this before. When Ralph Rangnick was saying United need 9, 10 signings, I'm like, United aren't capable of making 9, 10 signings in a
Yeah.
summer simply because of how slow they move at
Yep.
pace. And again, this is brought up in Laurie's piece, right? Whereas Solskjaer felt that the 3 signings that he was being guaranteed was just about all United could get done, right? Because of
Yep.
how slow everything moves and how you just have to justify. So, he's working at a football club that is massively inefficient in just about every department.
Yep.
I honestly believe is, James, that if Pep Guardiola was working for United, there's no way to have European Cups in the leagues. There's just no way. Right?
Yeah.
A coach can refine your game. It can give you certain good habits and all that there, but it can't make you great. And something else I was listening to, sorry to finish this long point.
Yeah.
I was talking the other day about, I was listening to a podcast from The Athletic about the Arsenal and Everton doctor. And they were talking about Saka and Saka getting injured. And they were talking about what Premier League teams do through the week. And he goes, vast majority of them aren't really doing intensive training. You do that at the
Yeah.
start of preseason, and a lot of it is rest, recovery, game,
Yep.
and
Yep.
and so he's like, you don't see a lot of intent. He goes, and the problem is with injuries that are non-contact injuries, they're really difficult to predict because there's no objective, obvious threshold between
Yeah.
this is too much and this is going to get you injured.
And it's going to change between
Yeah,
every player so
yeah.
much.
And what's more, he goes, players lie to you.
Yeah, of course.
Players have a little knock, they're not going to tell you because
Yeah.
they
They
don't
want to
want to
play.
get dropped,
Yeah.
right?
They want to
So
play.
he goes, top players, well, he goes, they'll lie to you for different reasons, right? So, especially if you've got an international game coming up, they don't want to miss the international game. There's loads of reasons why they won't tell you the truth. If you leave one of the top players out, predicting he's going to get an injury, you're going to have a problem with the player and the club, right? So, in some sympathy with managers, it's not an exact science. And he goes, and even amongst the doctors, there's not complete agreement on what is an acceptable load. He goes, usually where injuries happen is when you get a huge contrast between what a player's conditioned to doing and what you're asking to do. So if someone's been sitting on the bench and they play 3-4 games in a row, boom, regular, right? You're going to see players pick up injuries.
Yeah.
Right? So he goes, well, they've been out for a while, and you bring them back, and you got to play like Hoyland. Nothing to do. That's how they pick up injuries when there's a huge contrast in the load. And of
Yep.
course, they play too much. But he also brought up another good point, saying talking about strikes, you have no chance because the fact that players are playing too much only affects the very, very top players. Players below
Yeah.
that are not doing it. They're not going to get
Correct.
agreement on that.
Correct.
So,
Yep.
so yeah, some slight defense of Ten Hag. It's not it's not a black and white issue. Like how much
Yeah.
do you play a player before he gets injured?
For sure. And again, it's just one of those things I think shouldn't be, again, down to him entirely as well. I mean, you really do have and are supposed to have experts who are supporting these where maybe they don't know 100%, but as with anything, nothing is generally that black and white as to say, this is the hard line rule for it. But you're always better off relying on the expertise of individuals who are, that is their specialty, that is their expertise, and relying on them and utilizing them in really any area. But yeah, hopefully it gets better. One thing I would just wanted to add here, because before I forget, just on the injury front, news is that Malacia and Shaw shouldn't be too much longer, fortunately, from what I'm hearing as well. That this morning I heard that both of them would be able to be, or I've started to working up to fitness. That doesn't necessarily mean they're back on grass running, things like that. But the hope is before November that they could both be back, which would obviously make a huge difference. I think Reguilon will be back after the international break. But having Luke Shaw and Malacia on makes a huge difference, not in just that Diogo Dalot can get a rest too. Luke Shaw can play left center back. It actually makes a huge difference to the team overall, those players returning. I think as good as some players can be in their energy and effort, there's something that there's definitely something that Luke Shaw brings, and this as well will add to quite a few things. There's a quality that Luke Shaw brings in specifically his relationship, having been at the club for a long time with Marcus Rashford, that last
Yeah,
year was almost automatic in
yeah,
resulting in
no
goals.
question.
And it's like without him, yeah, Marcus Rashford at times looked like he's floundering on his own on the left,
Hmm.
unable to do anything. You put Luke Shaw in there, I think you see a difference for the team and for him. And there is that aspect of those relationships building. There's the aspect of that building with Rasmus Højlund. He still's not scoring in the Premier League. That's fine. It'll happen. You can see the qualities are there,
Mm.
but he's not getting the service. And it's not
Yeah, that's
necessarily
my
even for
point. Yeah,
lack of
not necessarily.
trying.
Hmm.
It's about they don't really know necessarily. They don't. There's a lot of moments where that snap decision has to be made that they don't know he's going to be there, or he's going to be making that run, or he's going to be in this position, or he's going to be doing this. That they're all going to have to learn from, or that he doesn't know. Hey, when Bruno's here, he's going to be constantly doing this. Those relationships have to build, and that'll help quite a lot. But yeah, I think that that overall, the injuries returning back will help quite a bit,
100%.
and then Kabi Mainu should be back, and Amad Diallo
Yeah,
as well,
encouraging.
very very soon. And speaking, just kind of wrapping up the point on Casemiro, that's as we saw in preseason, there's a goal for Kabi Mainu to play in that kind of position.
Hmm.
And so hopefully it gives us a little bit more options and a little more flexibility. And on the whole, when it comes to Ten Hag, and then I think we could talk about maybe some of the Sancho, some of the dressing room things and all of that. Part of the issue with all of this is that you're not going to get any better if you replace Eric Ten Hag with anybody else.
Hmm.
As you were saying, you could put Pep Guardiola and he would struggle with certain things majorly. For the level that we want to reach, I don't think there's an answer with the way the club is being run right now, which is a little bit of a depressing take because I usually feel very positive about certain things. But I do think that no matter what I believe are the faults and um, shortcomings of the current manager, which I think there are quite a few, but it doesn't really matter. I don't think that you have a system that anyone can succeed in as it is presently. We're going to constantly make the mistakes that we continue to make and violate the policies that we continue to set based on individuals' decisions um, that lead to failures down the road and set you back. What looks like a good call at one point in time in Casemiro turns out to be one of your biggest problems the next year, and it all comes from poor planning from the top down. As we said at the start of last summer, they could have managed things so much better to where they had an answer from Frankie de Jong early on, and they could have gone for somebody else. They could have pursued even perhaps Chouameni back then, who had been on their radar for years before he went to Madrid. They could have pursued Declan Rice. There's a lot of things that could have been done differently if the management was different and there wasn't this logjam that goes to Joel Glazer, who, by the way, has his own football advisors. So regardless of what information is being given from people within the club, some guy that Joel's paying himself might be the one making the calls for Manchester United at the end of the day in that de facto director of football situation. And that goes across the board. So it's a very difficult situation that Eric Ten Hag has. And it's, one we can only hope that perhaps during this international break, we do get something on the side of finality or movement when it comes to the potential ownership situation, because it is a serious problem and will always continue to be until it is resolved.
I want to get through this international break without any scandals breaking, so we can.
Right.
Couple of things I wanted to touch on that you mentioned, which are interesting. Hopefully, Kobe Mainoo's return, that is contingency planning, where we can replace Casemiro if the kid has a strong second half of the season. It was the other thing that I meant to mention on that our Arsenal Everton doctor talking about how common it is for young players to get injuries from 16 to 2021
Yeah.
because of the
Yes.
physical changes in their body, and it's very, very common for them to pick up bad injuries at that age group, which was really interesting. Also, because the contrast and the load and everything else. Again, with Ten Hag, if United were to get rid of Ten Hag, and I don't think that's even close or even should be, that decision has to be made by someone that's a football person that understands football, not Joe Glazer, not Rich Holmes. For
Correct.
the thing I said
Correct.
last week, because
Correct.
they need to know why he failed. But one of the things that they have to make clear if that ever happened, that's not as a consequence of players not liking him. Because if
Yeah.
players
Yeah.
sense that is something that they can do,
Yeah.
they'll be in this forever, right?
Yeah.
So there has to be very, very clear understanding this that you have no influence of getting the manager sacked. I agree with you 100% with Luke Shaw and the partnership with Rashford. In Rashford's slight defence, on the thing that you just talked about with Rasmus Højlund, United's expectation, United fans' expectation of Rashford is completely different of Garnacho. Rashford's judged on
Yeah.
goals, right?
Yeah.
If you want a left winger and judge him solely on goals, then you can't expect him to be creating for Højlund, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Which
they
is
can't,
trying
yeah,
like
yeah.
almost to a fault recently. Yeah.
But Garnacho, when he creates and doesn't score, he's lauded, right? And this is so you can see this in how they play. So
Yeah.
Rashford's conscious. I need to get on the goal scale. I need to score. I need to score. I need to score. I need to score. And I was reading some of the stats on how like, he hasn't had a single chance inside the 6-yard box at all this
Yep.
season.
Yep.
And Garnacho has a different expectation. When Garnacho came on the weekend, there was a noticeable improvement in difference. In fact, the goal that was disallowed earlier came as a result of Garnacho pulling the cross in. Then he pulls the ball back, McTominay scores, right? Because Garnacho doesn't feel the same pressure to get inside, shoot, and score. His pressure is get to the bar and create, put balls in the box. And I'm not going to get criticized if I don't score. But if I create, I'll be sufficient. If Rashford's just creating and not scoring, Rashford's still getting criticized. So I think in some Rashford's slight defense, his threshold for a good game is totally different than what
Yeah.
Garnacho's is. So but Garnacho, is someone that makes the difference when he comes on, made a big difference. And I don't think, Ten Hag took Rashford off. I don't think United win that game on the weekend if Garnacho doesn't play.
Well,
I want
and there's just on the factor of that too. There's the thing that unfortunately, what I want to talk about on this is that I think that fans get very, very caught up in trying to have players compete with each other when it's not really the case. For one, coming on as a substitute into a game is totally different to starting.
completely different.
It's a completely different game. It is easier, and this is not a criticism at all. It's easier to make an impact as a substitute. You're coming on of fresh legs against a team that has been chasing your replacement for 65 minutes. And the game states are different. Everything's different. Garnacho has been very effective as a substitute. He's struggled as much, if not more, as a starter most of the time that he's gotten the chances. But part of the question that I would have, and then maybe it'll lead you to the next thing, and maybe not, is for me, what I would be asking Eric Ten Hag is, why didn't you get both of them on the pitch, Rashford and Garnacho?
They're going to have to find a way to do that, James.
Because we've started Bruno Fernandes on the right,
Mhm.
which I'm not a fan of at all, frankly. I don't think he's had a good game on the
I
right for
agree with
United in
you.
a long time. He's right-footed. Why can't we put Garnacho out there? Why
They're
can't we
going to
put
have to find
Garnacho
a way
out
to
there
get.
and keep Bruno in the middle?
Yeah.
Or Rashford. I mean, I'd rather keep Rashford on the left, but either way, why can't we put Garnacho out there on the right if we're going to use a right footer and Bruno anyway, and keep Bruno into the midfield? Bruno's credit usually is a good runner. He tracks back really well. By putting him on the wing, he's able to provide a bit. He's even providing a bit less defensive coverage, which might be some of the problems that we're having on these goals because he does run back. He does work hard. 99% of the time, Bruno is hustling back on defense as well. And I'd like to see him stay in the midfield. But that would be my question because I think one of the biggest problems that Ten Hag has, where I think he opens the door to a lot of criticism, is Antony. I still think that Antony, when he came on, for one, he was getting some boos from the fans in the stadium for reasons that are probably not football related. But I think he was again quite ineffective. There was a lot of moments on the break. He made a poor decision on a 3-on-1 situation to try to pass it very early. instead of continuing. He scuffed his shot on a couple of occasions. He's fairly ineffective. He's been fairly ineffective since he's joined. He doesn't have a league goal in like almost a year now,
Yeah.
or he has like one league goal in the last 12 months as
That
a
far
right
is the way on
winger.
it.
Yeah, and it's like, what do we, when do we address the elephant in the room
Yeah,
here?
no, it's unacceptable.
And that is the one area that Erik ten Hag is opening himself up to pretty massive criticism
Yeah,
when it comes
I
to
agree.
Anthony. Yeah.
I think one of the problems for getting Garnacho and Rashford on the pitch at the same time is if you look at how Ten Hag plays his wingers, is Anthony is so predominantly left-footed, plays on the right. Rashford's predominantly right-footed, plays on the left.
Yeah.
And so he wants his wingers to cut in. And this is always also one of the problems with Pellistri, because Pellistri's right-footed and Pellistri wants to hug the line and go wide. Right? But Ten Hag wants those three forwards, close proximity to each other. Because he thinks, obviously there's a lot of interchange and it puts defenders all over the place. It's easier to mark when there's three of them completely spread out. So how do you do that when, Garnacho's left-footed too? Or right-footed, I believe.
Right-footed,
And so how do you do this? I think it's a big challenge, and again brings up the Jadon Sancho issue. How does Jadon Sancho have a career at Manchester United when he wants to play on the left and he would be third choice? I honestly think Ten Hag, if United could get good money for him in January, we'd be happy. I'll get to him. So you could talk to him about him a second. So yeah, I think I agree with you 100% that Anthony is a major problem, and I think it's when you're not scoring goals. Prior to the game on Saturday, United had scored 7. There was 7 league goals. I mean, most teams have scored twice as much as that. It's completely unacceptable. And when one of your problems is an £85 million winger that should be contributing, look at his contemporaries, you look at Saka, you look at other players in that position, like Mo Salah, other players, they're contributing 15, 20 goals a season. Rashford's expected to do that. Why isn't the same expected of Anthony?
Yep, exactly. And I think that this is part of the challenge in talking about Sancho, because as I understand it, the whole initial issue really stemmed around Anthony. There's a lot of stuff going on in a locker room that is probably not worth talking about, simply because when you start talking about it, people will think it's unusual. A lot of it's not unusual.
Yeah, it's not.
But it gets taken out of context and becomes like an issue when it's not. And my intention, I think our intention in things, as people will know, has never been to stir up drama where there is none. That's not why we do these podcasts and videos and use our platforms, is to cause problems when things are not. The type of things that we've heard very, very easily are things that could be taken to use as a stick to beat either the players or the managers with unfairly. But one of the things that has been an issue and is an issue is Anthony. It's the one person where there is a sentiment about the favoritism when it comes to him that will not go away, and goes beyond Jadon Sancho. It goes well beyond Jadon Sancho. But what happened originally was, it seemed to be that there was the morning of Friday, before that game where Sancho wasn't selected, he left training early after having basically a big fight with Erik ten Hag. And so it's a little bit of a complex situation here, because as I said on Twitter, Jadon Sancho thinks he's right. And that's why he's not going to apologize. He's not going to say I apologize when he believes that he's right, and that apologizing isn't going to change the situation. Whether he is or he isn't, you can kind of understand that. If you think a situation is unfair, you apologizing isn't going to change it, then why apologize? If the other side isn't going to change what they're doing, then you're not going to apologize, because it's going to make no difference to you, and it's better for you to leave that situation. I'm not sure that he's right on this, especially in the way of going about it. But they had a big fight that really, a lot of it centered around Anthony, around selections and team choices and things like that. And then it was brought up that he wasn't training well, which he took issue with, because what he was technically saying was, I was training well up until that point when I got pissed off about this team selection and these kind of things. So, there's a little bit of truth from both sides on this scenario, which explains his comments a bit more, what he was saying, whether he's right or wrong. But since that point in time, he's completely refused to essentially engage in the situation. He's been training either with the youth or not at all. And completely separate to the team. They're already looking at replacing him. They were already looking at replacing him in summer, which I'll bring it back to in defense of both Jadon Sancho and Erik ten Hag. Once again, comes down to United. If they were already looking to replace him, any serious club would have just replaced him.
But weren't they looking at
waited a year?
Weren't they looking at stuff?
Yeah, they were already lining up options. They were already looking at, this is what United do. And it's very frustrating. They make a decision to do something, and then they decide we're going to handle it next year.
Mm.
And it happens all the time. It happened with Casemiro. It's happened, because even if Casemiro is going to stay this year, should Palacios or whoever they're going to replace him with not be here already?
Like
so that they're playing and learning the role, like Real Madrid do with everybody. You know what I mean? Like they all do that. Rodri was brought in before Fabinho was gone.
They tried to do that with Van de Beek and Pogba, to bring Van de Beek in. That's what Pogba was successful. But this is to be fair though. Yeah. The reason why you bring them in a year early is so that you find out whether these players are actually capable of doing that.
And you take the pressure off too. Mm-hmm. Should Rasmus Højlund not have been brought in maybe while someone like Cavani was still at the club, right? Yeah. Where you have a year to learn from somebody, where you have another option. But we don't do that. Should Antony, in his defense, not have been brought in when we already had a right winger in place? I mean, gosh, we should have bought a right winger back to replace, Nani or Ronaldo. And we never did, like behind them. It's time and time again. It's the same thing with this right wing position here with Jadon Sancho. They knew they potentially wanted to replace him, that he probably didn't have necessarily long term, that they were open to offers for him, that there had been discussions or preliminary contacts with other clubs like Tottenham, Newcastle, Chelsea, as mentioned, and they were already scouting and looking at right wingers. But it's never do it now, because it all comes down to a financial decision. They don't have the money. They don't have the money to sell him and buy him, or the money's not made available to sell him and buy him. Same as the money isn't made available to replace Casemiro before they can sell him off to Saudi. The money's not there. Yep. So they're looking at a loan to buy. And why on earth would, a team like Leverkusen loan Palacios? Why would Everton loan on, Onana? They would never. There's no reason for it. So they're not going to do it. So then those players will come in later on. And that puts United constantly a year behind. Yeah. And that continues to happen, with all of that, and it leads to frustration for players where they know they're not necessarily in the plans, but they're there and they're stuck there. And it leads to frustrations for managers who should be able to, regardless of signings, I think managers, if they do not feel they can work with the player, they should be able to get rid of them immediately. 100%. They should always be able to get rid of them immediately.
And it's not even that they wait a year; they leave it to the very end of that year.
Yeah,
young thing. Let's wait months. Let Casemiro. Let's bring him in the last 2 weeks of the window instead of integrating him at the start of the window and do all that. Yep. And you don't have to, wait months for him to find his. Anyway, I know this is just to quickly wrap up the Sancho thing. I understand not apologizing if it's in May or June where you can leave in the immediate future. But even if it's insincere, apologize because it's in your best interest, and then turn around at December 31st and go, I want to leave. I don't know. To me, at this point, it becomes, the longer he leaves it, the harder it becomes to do this. And I don't know if he's adding value to his perceived value. By not
maybe that's the point, though,
And so,
the worse it gets, the easier it is for someone to buy him.
Yeah, yes.
I'm just.
I think what also affects how he gets paid, if it affects what the type of deal that he gets. If Jadon Sancho's leaving United in January after a run of 2-3 months of good form, he can go anywhere he wants. Yeah. But now, once you don't play and you increase the risk, then you decrease the level of club that comes in for you that's willing to take that risk. And I think for Sancho, if I'm a top sporting director, I'm going, do we need this? It's different if he has an amazing run of form and you're like, okay, I can see the incentive, and football has a short memory, so Everything's
There's
about
no doubt that
what you're
he's
doing
being
right now.
poorly advised.
No, 100
I mean, he's
percent.
probably poorly advised in coming to United in the first place.
100%. Okay. Quick comment on obviously the other thing, big thing that happened this weekend was the death of Kathy Ferguson. And deepest condolences to Sir Alex and the family. Ironically, and there's just this weird symmetry life. United win in the 90s in Fergie time. With a Scot from the academy on the weekend that Kathy passed away. I've had Darren Ferguson on my podcast before, and I know how glowingly spoke of his mother and how important she was to the family, and of course to the success of Manchester United. So, our deepest condolences to Sir Alex, Kathy, and the family. Just one or two other things I want to touch on. The celebration police. Someone made a mistake of sharing a Gabby Agbonlahor clip with me, who the stick is getting a bit old. I mean, I think this whole reason for existence is to troll United. I've actually never heard him say anything outside of trolling United fans. The only time I ever see anything from Gabby Agbonlahor is when he has something negative to say about Manchester United. And I think, it's so transparent at this point that this is his own reason for existing. Like, I would be embarrassed if I was him. Like, have you no substance? Have you nothing else to contribute? I mean, this is Twitter is 99% of this, of trolling United fans and other football fans. You'd think you'd have some other value and try to make yourself, attractive to other broadcasters and get something outside of this shtick. But then there's the other people that want to police how you celebrate and what win should mean. And want to remind you that Brentford have won one game this season. And want to all the things that you already know, of course. And to me, it's like, look, if you can't enjoy something like this, now, I have to accept I was angry after the 1-0 Wolves game, right? But this is different. United have been on this long, atrocious run, right? And they win a game, 2 goals in the last minute, and supposedly the most competitive league in the world. Like I said the other week, how quickly teams become shit when United beat them. And then people are telling you that you need to calm down and you need to not be happy. I mean, you saw that guy, Ranson Bance, who sounded like he was just being notified of a tax audit whenever McTominay scored the second goal. And I will admit, my PTSD with VAR hampered my celebration a bit, because I'm like wanting to go nuts. And I'm like, this is going to get ruled out. This is going to get ruled out. And one of the downsides to VAR. But I don't really understand that. I don't really understand telling people that they shouldn't be happy.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I understand I understand why some people feel themselves having difficulty to celebrate things. When they're watching and they feel very negative about how things are going. I understand why they themselves would feel like they can't celebrate. They're not willing. One of the things that has been frustrating that I definitely disagree with over the years in terms of fans is that the concept of, if you're not, like, if you don't win a trophy, there's nothing to be happy about. It's very weird. It's definitely very weird. I mean, there are clubs with diehard supporters that will never win a trophy for decades.
Yeah.
What about them? What about all those people, who support Brentford, who support Crystal Palace, who support these clubs? That when are they going to win a trophy next? It's going to be a long time. There are things to celebrate, and it's not demeaning to make a comparison of Manchester United to those teams. We don't have a God-given right as fans to deserve more than the fans of these teams. And sports is all about celebrating the destination and the how you're going along the way, the journey to get there, the ups and the downs, the things that happen along the way. Nobody wins every single game on the way to a trophy, on the way to a title, on the way to anything. It's never happened, right? Nobody's won every single game in a season, and it probably never will. And it's like, celebrate the good things that happen, and enjoy it, or don't if you don't feel like it. But it doesn't matter how other people feel about
I
these
just
things.
don't understand. Like I said this on the podcast last week, Liverpool and United are the 2 most successful football clubs in England.
Yep.
United's success basically happened in 2 eras in a 145-year history. It happened under Sir Man, it happened under Sir Alex. So from maybe 100 10 years of their history was mediocrity, right? It was
Yeah.
the trophy here, trophy there. When they were in the second division, the United Championship, United had record attendances, right?
Yeah.
The fans didn't turn around and go, well, I'm not going because we didn't beat Barcelona. There was
Yeah.
none of this nonsense, right? This
Yeah.
spoiled brat nonsense. Where I'm not celebrating because we got promoted from the championship. It's just the championship or the Wolves first division. It had record
Yeah.
attendances. If you ask people from that era that were there, they will tell you that was one of the most enjoyable times as being a United fan. Juventus, when they got relegated into Serie B because of Calciopoli, didn't turn around and say we're not supporting. I mean, this is ridiculous. This
Yeah.
is people living up to the exact stereotype of
Mm-hmm.
fair weather fans that
Yep.
unless you're winning, you're not. I mean, this is absurd to me. And so, like I said, we're very lucky to be living in an era where I've got to see it win 2 European Cups, 13 Premier League titles, FA Cups, European Super Cups, UEFA Cups. This is there is no United fans in their 145-year history have got to enjoy this, right? Except for
I,
those in the current era.
I
So most
think,
fans don't get to see
yeah,
Liverpool.
I think a lot of it does come from people who probably didn't see that, frankly. A lot of people
Yeah.
who are younger, not to, I don't know where anybody, these people from, some of them are probably from all over the world, but younger people who did not experience a lot of the highs directly, at least not at a level where they remember them, but ended up becoming United fans either because they were most successful club at the time or had been for the last 20 years when they became fans, or because of family or reasons like that. And there's probably, I can understand it. There's definitely a frustration. I've spoken to a lot of people in my communities and places like that only started supporting United in 2012 and 13, just from age and things like that. That was only when they really got serious about it, and they maybe witnessed one last title from Sir Alex, and they're regaled by, and it must be frustrating to some degree, right? They're regaled by all the stories of the past and the history and all these great things that they never experienced and witnessed. And then you have the last decade of what's gone on since then, and it can be very frustrating. And I think it spills over into all of this rage and frustration being taken out on other people. There is that doesn't justify it. It's wrong. It's the wrong way to support things, but it's a direction of a lot of modern fans that have moved into that is hard to agree with, and is certainly not something, we obviously should always be pressing for winning, for standards, but it's a lot of what happened under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer too. That was very frustrating. I think some of it's disingenuous. Some of it is purely based on um, wanting things to be bad. It is amazing how this happens, but there are absolutely a lot of fans out there that want things to be worse under people they don't like, or with people they don't
Yeah, I
like.
don't
They
understand that
don't
at all.
celebrate when certain players score because they don't like them. And it's like, do I think McTominay is a player who should be at this point in time, no offense to him, at United for the standard and the level that we want to play? Probably not. Maybe not. Will I celebrate when he scores? Absolutely, 100%. Do I want him to do well every time he steps on the pitch? Absolutely, 100%. Um,
Let me
do
just say
I?
one thing on McTominay,
Yeah, go ahead.
because when we talked quickly about what his value was to the squad and why I felt
Yeah,
he was more important than Fred, one of the things that I'd said is he gives you height at set pieces.
yeah,
You can, if you're defending the lead, you can stick
yeah,
him on defense. He'll clear balls for you all day. If you're chasing
yeah,
something, you can throw him up front, and hopefully he gets on the end of something.
yeah,
What he did in that game is one of the main reasons why I feel that he was more important for United to
sure.
keep than Fred, because he get up again. He's 6'4", he can go on the end of it.
Yeah,
And the irony, of course, Harry Maguire flicks it on. McTominay gets the one or two players that Ten Hag wanted to leave,
yeah.
wanted both to leave, end up probably
Saving
getting the
him,
most important
probably.
win
Yeah.
at United. But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to object. Go ahead there.
No, no, no. You're right. But part of the problem is again, should Scott McTominay have been spending most of his career at United playing as the deepest midfielder? Absolutely not. Neither should
He's also
Fred.
more than a £30 million midfielder, man. I would
Yeah.
definitely United would pay
No.
more than
I actually agree with you on that. I actually agree with that. I think that Scott McTominay is a better is like it's a fun. He's one of those funny players that's in the middle, where I actually think he's be an extremely valuable player to a lot of teams in the Premier League. I think he
Yeah.
would be extremely valuable. Look at Fred, for example. I know it's a different league. He joined Fenerbahce. They've not lost a game. They've won, I think, 12 straight games. They're top of the league, on course for quite an incredible season for them. It's a different league, but we also lost to Galatasaray. So, you see how it goes. But it's about the usage of these players and poor planning at the end of the day. If McTominay was playing, I think, in a different position for most of the time, he'd been at United, used as a different player, not relied upon to be the deepest midfielder and be this like defensive midfielder savior for United that he's not, people would have a different opinion of him. There's always been a usage for utility players like that when the rest of the team is constructed very well. And I think he'd be very valuable for a lot of other teams. But yeah, just on the last kind of a fan point, it's obviously a difficult culture and mix of cultures dealing with in supporting a club like United in the modern day when it comes to modern fans, this, that, or the other. I wouldn't cast a brush and say that it's all young people or it's all online fans or it's all this or it's all that, because it's not. It's a mixture. I know plenty of people who started supporting United in the last 7-8 years that don't act like this. So yeah, it's just interesting and unfortunate. And what I said after the game was a win is a win to celebrate, and then enjoy it and draw your do your analysis and all that tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. There's a time and a place, right? There's
Yeah.
euphoria at the moment, and then you can parse it later about whether it's worth staying happy for. And of course, there's time to reflect on the negatives that'll come. But I don't think it should temper the moment of euphoria. Anyway, it's up to everyone else. It's just my view. But
I still sorry, on the last point, I still remember the final goal before COVID lockdowns at Old Trafford that McTominay scored against City. Yeah. That was one of the best games I've watched in a long, long time. It was one of the most fun games to watch. We didn't win any trophies that year.
They've done the travel over Guardiola that season.
I know.
I mean,
that's something to celebrate. I'll enjoy that. I'll always enjoy that we did that.
He just never got enough credit.
Yeah.
I mean, you look over the years how United have been, and you look at how many times United came back from a goal down. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think they broke the record for that.
Yeah.
How many times they won away from home? Some of the
undefeated away from home. Yeah.
How he did when he first came in. And I know it didn't end well, 100%. But he got second, came within a whisker penalty kick away of winning the UEFA Cup. Made some mistakes. I think in that FA Cup semi-final by rotating against Chelsea, which I think cost him. But I don't think he got anywhere near the credit he deserves. Okay, mate, we'll leave it there. Thanks to all of you for downloading the podcast. As always, don't forget, give James a follow at United Muppetiers. Subscribe to all his platforms, Discord, everything. Definitely worth following. Best way you can support the show is to do that. Subscribe to the podcast or the Beyond the Pitch YouTube channel or James's YouTube channel. That means an awful lot. So please take the time to do that. It definitely is appreciated. So we'll be back again next week. Take it easy, man.
Thanks, you too.